Okay, so this one's going to be fun today, guys. Earlier, I asked for your questions to be submitted on what bad advice would you like for me to give out today. And I got two really good questions that I want to address on today's live video. Thank you so very much for your submissions. Do not hesitate to direct message me your relationship questions during this amazing summer that we're experiencing here in Denver. It's almost like 95 degrees today. As we wait for people to jump on, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dave Glazer. I host the BVR podcast, Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast in Denver, Colorado for authentic dating. So thank you very much for joining us. We have two audience submitted questions that I want to get to today. And we'll start with the fun one first, and then we'll get into the serious one after that. I was asked, should I go on that Zoom date? By one of our amazing listeners. And the answer to should I go on that Zoom date? Should I go on that park date? Should I go on that date to a restaurant that's supposed to be at 50% capacity? Should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Thanks, Josie, for checking in. Thanks, Liz. Absolutely appreciate the support each and every time. If you love this video, please share it with somebody that you know could gain some value. So we're talking about, should I go on that Zoom date? And what I've experienced, I love the little wave, that's awesome. And what I've experienced here during shelter in place and dating is that everything for me feels like long distance anyways. So why not go on that Zoom date? It is probably the safest way for us to date at any point in time, with or without a pandemic. And the reason why I say that is because we're putting our feelers out there. We're welcoming love into our lives by receiving that invitation. So therefore, we're kind of bringing abundance into our lives. And when we have that mindset, it's a really good thing. It's just a Zoom date. That's all it is. It could lead to something more. It could lead to something great. And that's awesome. But when our expectations are put up so high even before we start the date, then we're setting ourselves up for failure because we're thinking so much about, oh my gosh, what if this, what if that? All these different scenarios are going through our head, kind of thinking a little bit ahead of ourselves. When it gets closer to any date, okay, let's say that you've been asked out on Sunday, it's now Tuesday. As Monday progresses and into Tuesday, you start to get this gut instinct of like, yep, I'm a hell yes on this date. Hey, Rachel, thanks for tuning in. Absolutely love that you're supporting us with the podcast. Really appreciate it. It's a hell yes for me to go on this date, whether it's a Zoom or a park date or meeting somebody up for a happy hour at a patio, wearing a mask, not wearing a mask. That doesn't really matter. Your gut instinct will tell you whether it's correct or not, whether it's right for you or not, and if it's the right time with the right person. I always tune into my gut instinct the closer it gets to a date. Am I feeling butterflies because I'm excited? Or am I apprehensive because I know, honestly, in my heart of hearts, that it's the wrong time for me? And that's what I wanted to respond to your question of like, should I go on this Zoom date? One, it's harmless. Like, it's the safest way for us to date right now. We're welcoming abundance into our lives. Hey, Fatima. Hey, Darius. Really appreciate you guys joining us today. Go ahead and share the video with your friends and family or coworkers that you know would get a ton of value out of this, because we're talking about welcoming abundance into our lives and trusting your gut instinct when it comes to accepting a date with a hell yes or it's a no for me. If it's a no, be polite and say, hey, I just don't think it's the right time for me to be dating. And people, if they are a good person and with good intentions, they're going to understand that because we're all in this same time frame. We're all in the boat together, especially when it comes to dating. All right, the second question that I was asked when I put it out there for you guys earlier is a little bit more heady. So stay with me here, guys. The question was, there's a ton of compatibility between me and this other person, but no physical attraction. What do I do? And this is a really good question because it comes back to, what are our values? Do our values line up? What are you looking for? And we could go really deep into all of those. But today we're talking about compatibility and physical attraction. Last week's episode of the podcast, we had a really good guest on, Brandon Rader. He's a matchmaker in town, and he had some advice for us, and I want to reiterate it. He said the first and second dates are to establish compatibility, and the third date is to establish chemistry. So we never really do know whether that physical attraction is there or not until we get into past that first date nervousness, past that chance to kind of get to know their idiosyncrasies, their quirks, and to kind of understand who they are a little bit more. Okay, first and second date, we're looking for values. Do our values match up? And then we can eventually get into this third date where the recommendation this past week when I interviewed Brandon was do a activity-based date where you can see them in action. Popular right now is mini golf. I went axe throwing a couple weekends ago, and it was a ton of fun because we could see each other in action. So Josie, big, huge supporter of the podcast, actually says, I think it takes months to get past some of that. And the timeline is not for everybody. It's totally different for you versus Mark versus James versus Sarah out there. The timeline is not the same at all for any one person. So I love that comment. Thank you so very much, Josie. Back to what we were talking about. There are some ways that we can generate physical attraction for another person, and that is making our decisions based on our values, because looks will fade. I mean, I turned 40 this coming Sunday. I reached out to some of our listeners about, hey, I'm going to have a birthday party. What's your thoughts on social distancing? And come on, spend some time at this barbecue that I'm going to celebrate in a couple weeks. So looks fade over time, but the values stay congruent. We're going to change a little bit, but when it comes to our values, those are the things that are most consistent. And when we make our decisions based on values, we have better potential to find a good, compatible partner long term versus choosing on physical attraction. Things can change in our physical appearance as well. I'm a personal trainer. I do my work mostly online. People can add lean muscle mass, improving their confidence, which helps them appear more attractive. Building lean muscle mass leads to a more calorie burn. I won't get into the science of it because we're talking about relationships, but when you build better lean muscle mass, you burn more body fat. Okay, so our body fat composition changes, making us more confident in ourselves, and our attraction improves, whether that's with our partner or with just the people that we come across in our day-to-day. Thanks for joining us, Nicolette. I absolutely appreciate you guys supporting us. We're talking about, if you guys have a question that I can answer for you right now before I jump off, in addition to these two questions that were submitted by our listeners earlier today, please feel free, comment below, and I'll jump on those questions as soon as I see them come across. The more interaction we have, the more likes, the more love that we have, the more fun we have. So if you're just joining us, I'm Dave. I host the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast, and I was finishing up talking about there's good compatibility, but no physical attraction. And lastly, I want to hit you with a hard truth here. Okay, what are we looking for here? Are we looking to only date our preferences, which lean towards physical attraction and physical appearance and those types of things that attract us to other people? Or are we making our decisions based on values and compatibility, which is the long-term recipe for success in a relationship, in addition to communication, comprehension, honesty, transparency, integrity? The list goes on. So I always recommend to our coaching clients here at the podcast to make your decisions based on your values. Preferences when it comes to physical appearance are important to generate that, the butterflies, and well, maybe not even just exclusively butterflies, but to generate that initial attraction. And the recipe for long-term is building a strong foundation for the relationship to be built on after that. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. I really appreciate everybody joining us. This was a lot of fun for me. And if you need some help in your relationship, please don't hesitate to direct message me. Download to yesterday's podcast with Lori Jean Glass. It was an awesome conversation on some really deep topics that I'm passionate about. So subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube, which we're uploading daily videos now. And don't hesitate to direct message me here on Instagram so that I can answer your relationship questions. And Josie, yes, I would love to do these live videos more often. So if you're inspired to ask me a question about relationship that you want answered on a live video or on a podcast episode coming up that I can ask an expert of ours, please don't hesitate to direct message me, ask me your relationship questions, and I'll be promptly getting back to you. Again, this is Dave, host of the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast, wishing you health and happiness wherever you're at.